I wanna hear the one about the big old plum tree. I wanna hear the one about the giggly bumblebee. I wanna hear the one about the juggling jumping flea. That's the story that I wanna hear. That's the story, that's the story, that's the story that I wanna hear. That's the story, that's the story, that's the story that I wanna hear.
Hello, I'm Ronnie and welcome to the classroom edition of That's the Story. Today, we're going to be having a game called Who Am I? Today, we're going to have a theme running all the way through the show. See if you can guess what theme it is. But first of all, let's start it all off with the craziest zoo on planet Earth.
The zoo at Thornbury was unlike most others. It was run by a family, a sister and two brothers. Instead of just lions and zebras and a giraffe, its collection of animals was, well, rather bizarre. A four-humped camel lived at the zoo. He snorted and groaned and made heaps of blue poo. Next to him lived Carla the llama. She liked reading war stories and wore head-to-toe armour. In the reptile house slid a snake called Sid, all slippery and soft. And can you guess what he did? Sid's secret love was boogieing to songs. He danced, swished and swayed all night long. Zippo the hippo was also quite odd. He wore a pink apron around his plump bod. Zippo had a small oven he used to bake his favourite recipes like sludge muffins and mud cake. Sally the giraffe was a vain young thing. Around her amazingly tall neck she wore 100 gold rings. Sparkly diamonds, red rubies, emeralds and pearls. She was the flashiest giraffe in the entire world. In a grassy field near the zoo shop was a huge rabbit that did more than just hop. Bugsy did star jumps, somersaults, flips and twists. He could cartwheel for hours with a flick of his wrist. Most zoos have a bear. Nothing unusual there, but the one at Thornbury wore makeup and permed her hair. She had long curly lashes and lips painted bright red. She wore a snazzy green jumpsuit, even in bed. Perhaps the strangest animal at Thornbury Zoo was a tall, skinny, bright thing called a Watchamadoo. With pink fluffy feathers, 3 eyes and webbed feet, the Watchamadoo was certainly unique.
Me and the teacher would really like to see you draw some pictures of some of those ever so crazy animals. Keep on listening. In a couple of moments, we're going to be playing a game called Who Am I? Time to get your thinking cap on after this.
As far back as Quinn could remember, he could do something that most people couldn't. He could turn himself into other creatures. This was quite a useful skill to have sometimes. When he wanted to taste some of his dad's legendary freshly made apple and feijoa pie, for example, he simply turned himself into a fly and landed on the edge of the pie, sucking up the sweet and warm sticky juice with his newly formed proboscis. Usually Dad didn't notice, and if he did, he was always too slow to swat Quinn the fly. When he wanted to get home from school quickly, he turned himself into a dog and ran all the way. 4 legs are better than 2, you see, so he would arrive home only half as puffed as if he'd run as himself. Once he turned himself into a praying mantis and hung out on the wall of the teacher's staff room for an entire lunchtime. He heard a lot of things that day. He heard that Alice Westing was disruptive in class. He heard that Wide Eddie Farmer was going to move back to the coast. And he heard that Miss Jameson was dating Mr. Hawke. He kept a close eye on those two for the next few weeks. One night, Quinn couldn't sleep. All sorts of things were racing around in his head. Things about home, things about his friends, and lots of things about school. He could hear all sorts of noises coming from outside, banging, wailing, meowing, so he decided to turn himself into a cat and go and investigate. He did what he usually did. Held his breath, shut his eyes, and imagined He imagined a handsome brown and sandy striped cat with big green eyes and ears which could hear everything. After 30 seconds, just when his breath was beginning to run out, He opened his eyes and looked over to the mirror. Brilliant, he thought. Exactly the cat I had imagined. Quietly and gracefully, he sprang up onto the ledge below the open window, then dropped down onto the damp grass in the garden outside. He sidled round the corner of the garage to see where the noise was coming from. As he peeked round the edge of the green wheelie bin, he saw 3 cats. A big brown one, a skinny grey striped one, and a fat one with a strange sort of bluish coat. They were arguing. "It's my mouse," said the brown cat. "No, it's my mouse. I saw it yesterday," screeched the skinny grey cat. No, you didn't, because it wasn't even here yesterday," purred the bluish cat. As Quinn looked closer, he could see that the brown cat had one of its huge paws on top of a mouse, which was alive but looking extremely frightened. The mouse had a scratch mark behind one of its ears and was bleeding. Because Quinn was used to turning into creatures of all shapes and sizes, and he knew what it felt like to be those creatures, he hated cruelty to animals, birds, insects, amphibians, fish, lizards, and arachnids of any type. He wanted to rescue the mouse. He had an idea. "Hi," said Quinn, strolling casually into the brouhaha. "I see you've found my mouse. Thanks. Tilly, I won't tell you again. Don't run away from me." Quinn pretended to address the mouse. "But," said the brown cat. "But," said the skinny grey cat. "But," said the bluish cat. But before they had a chance to know what was happening, Quinn had bowled in, knocked the brown cat's paw off the mouse, picked up the still stunned mouse by the scruff of the neck and trotted off back towards his bedroom. His heart was thumping in his ears, but he thought he had pulled it off. Just to be sure, he turned himself into his favourite type of dog and closed his jaws very gently over the mouse. The cats, by this time, had got a hold of themselves and were running after the strange cat. But all they saw when they came round to the side of the house was a very mean-looking yellow Labrador. The Labrador growled, and the cats ran off at great speed. "Phew," sighed Quinn. "That was close." The mouse started to struggle, and the taste of mouse on Quinn's tongue wasn't nice. He hadn't eaten meat since he was 6, and even when he had once turned himself into a vampire bat, he made sure it was a vegetarian vampire bat. He spat out the mouse. "Are you okay?" asked Quinn.
"How dare you almost eat me and then ask me if I'm okay?"
shouted the mouse. Although it was small, its shout was surprisingly loud.
"Of course I'm not okay. I only became a mouse so that I could look at my Christmas presents in Mum and Dad's wardrobe. I didn't know that Titus would chase me to the point of exhaustion and then be dumb enough to nearly give me away to one of his friends."
And then in a smaller voice,
"I want to go home."
the mouse went very quiet and shut its eyes. It looked like it was either going to sleep or trying not to cry. Even though it didn't look like the mouse was listening, Quinn chipped in. "I'm sorry, I was just trying to get you away from them, you see. I'm a vegetarian dog. I mean cat. Well..." Quinn shut his eyes again and held his breath. When he opened his eyes, he was back to the human Quinn, squatting in his PJs on the grass outside his bedroom window. And he was face to face with, not a mouse, but Lucy Apnovich, the girl from 2 doors down the road. Her ear was bleeding. They looked at each other, startled, and began to laugh. They never spoke about it again, but sometimes you'd see 2 dogs running away from the school together, or 2 birds sitting on a telephone wire watching groups of people at the bus stop. And I'm sure once I saw 2 elephants on the horizon, heading for the bush.
Now, who am I? We're about to give you a whole lot of clues. From these clues, we want you to try and guess who it is we're talking about. You're allowed to use Google. You can even work in teams if you like. Listen very carefully. Here come those clues.
What's his name? What's she called? I think I know who that is. Who could it be? Let's wait and see what the clues are to this quiz.
This person was born on April the 21st, 1816. When her mother died, her sister Elizabeth would step in to help with the children. As children, the siblings created imaginary worlds and each wrote their own stories about their characters and their lives. After completing her education in 1839, she began a career as a governess to Yorkshire families. She published her first writings under the name Cura Bell. She died on March the 31st, 1855, aged just 38. Her most famous book was Jane Eyre.
What's his name? What's she called? I think I know who that is.
So, do you think you know who that is? Speaking of thinking, I think it's time to go to Aunt Nora's farm. Come on, let's go.
Roar! Went Rodney the tiger with an earth-shattering, ear-splitting sound. Pardon? Replied Hans the horse, politely but curiously. Hans had been taking an early morning trot when Rodney had leapt out from behind a tree. I said, roar! Shouted Rodney. Aha! And you are who? Asked Hans. Rodney the tiger, king of around here, said Rodney, puffing out his chest. I am hungry and thinking of breakfast. He smiled and raised an eyebrow at Hans. Ah, my stripy friend, I have no snacks with me. I was going to chew on a little grass down by the riverbank. You are welcome to join me, said Hans. Rodney stepped closer. I was thinking of something bigger and meatier, he growled. Oh, yeah, cried Hans happily. I understand. You are one of those, what does they call them? Tiger, said Rodney. No, said Hans. Rodney, that's my name, Rodney the tiger. No, the meat-eating animal, the carnivore, said Hans. That is correct, nodded Rodney. But how? Asked Hans. I'm amazed you could catch a cold, let alone an animal. Rodney narrowed his eyes, furious. I catch just about anything I want. Oh, said Hans. Can you fly? No. Then how do you catch birds? Asked Hans. I wait for them to land, merely, said Rodney, taken aback. What if they don't? Asked Hans. Well, then I don't catch them, muttered Rodney. I suppose you get lots of fish, then, continued Hans. Fish in the water, getting me wet. No, thank you, said Rodney. Well, what can you catch? You don't seem much good for anything, said Hans. Angrily, Rodney slammed his gigantic paw down in front of Hans and unsheathed his long, sharp claws. What do you think of that horse? Or should I say, breakfast, he fumed, baring his teeth and preparing to spring. Quite sharp, but it looks awfully soft, nodded Hans as he brought his big, hard, heavy hoof down on Rodney's paw. Rodney shot backwards into the bush, making a noise, well, just think of your cat. If you stepped on its tail, but bigger and much louder. And meantime, Hans happily carried on his morning walk, looking for some nice grass to chew on.
Hello, I'm Ronnie and welcome to the classroom edition of That's the Story. We've got a YouTube edition as well. Pop along to our YouTube channel, the That's the Story YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe. There's stories, cartoons, songs, silliness, it's lots of fun. Now, who's this scarf been made for?
Gordon hated winter. The chill went right into his bones, it seemed. It was especially bad at night. He'd shiver and shake and get aches in his neck. He really was quite miserable. You see, where he was from, it didn't really get all that cold, which meant that when it got cold in his new home, he really felt it. Gordon was from Africa, in the south, near the equator. He was used to warm, dry weather with not much rain and definitely no frosts. Now he lives at the zoo here in New Zealand. No, he doesn't work at the zoo. He lives at the zoo. Gordon is a giraffe, so a cold, achy, long neck was no small problem. As soon as he got up in the morning, he'd head to the sunny patch of his enclosure and bask in the warmth. On winter mornings, it would take till about 10 a.m. for the aches and stiffness to wear off, so he could bend down properly to eat his breakfast, by which time he was quite hungry. Mrs. Misselthwaite was a regular visitor to the zoo. She visited so often she had an annual pass. She loved watching all the animals and comparing the different ways they moved and spent their time. In the winter, she noticed that Gordon was a bit miserable and stiff, but that he freed up once he got warm in the sun. Mrs. Misselthwaite was a very thoughtful and considerate person. She wanted to do something to help, but wasn't sure what she could do. She thought long and hard, and suddenly she had an idea. She set to work on her project. It was quite a big project, and it took quite a lot of time. She even stopped going to the zoo as often because she was too busy to take time off to visit the animals. She worked day and night. She had to go back to the shop for extra supplies a number of times. Finally, she was finished. It looked rather splendid, even if she did say so herself. She packed it up in a big box and set off for the zoo first thing in the morning. She was waiting outside as the gates opened. She was so excited about her plan. As soon as the zoo opened, Mrs. Misselthwaite showed her annual pass and rushed straight to the giraffe enclosure. Well, as much as she could rush carrying a big box. When she got there, Gordon was just stirring and making his way slowly and stiffly towards the sunny patch in his enclosure. Mrs. Misselthwaite called him over. "Yoo-hoo, Gordon, I've made you something." Gordon walked to where Mrs. Misselthwaite was standing on the special raised viewing platform, which made her the same height as his head. When he reached her, she gave him a carrot, and she reached into the box and pulled out the longest scarf anyone could imagine. It was bright yellow and brown stripes to coordinate with Gordon's complexion, and was as long as a football field. She wrapped it round and 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 round Gordon's long neck. Gordon was delighted. If he'd had arms, he would have hugged Mrs. Misselthwaite, but instead he gave her a nuzzle with his nose, which is the giraffe equivalent of a hug. The scarf was so lovely and cosy, it was as if he were back in Africa. All through the winter, Gordon wore his scarf overnight, once the zoo was closed and all the people had left for the day. Each morning he'd wake up warm without any shivering or shakes or aches in his neck. He'd take the scarf off in the morning before the zoo opened and would be right as rain for the rest of the day. And every time Mrs. Misselthwaite came to the zoo, which was quite often again now she'd finished knitting Gordon's scarf, he'd walk over and give her a special nuzzle with his nose, the giraffe equivalent of a hug.
Don't forget to tell all your friends to subscribe to That's the Story. The more the merrier. Now, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always wanted to be an astronaut.
I wanna fly like a kite, all day and all through the night. Way up in the sky, I'd like to fly. I wanna fly like a kite. But I'm a donkey, and I'm staying right here on the ground. I wanna swim like a fish. That's my one and only really big wish. I wanna keep cool in my very own pool. I wanna swim like a fish. But I'm a donkey, and I'm staying right here on the ground. I wanna be a monkey in a tree, swinging wild and free, up amongst the leaves in the afternoon breeze. A monkey's life's for me, but I'm a donkey, and I'm staying right here on the ground. Hee-haw.
That's my lot for another week. Thanks ever so much for joining me. Please do tell all your friends about That's the Story and see if you can get someone to subscribe this week.
That's the story that I wanna hear.